So welcome everybody. This is going to be part one in a series on the study on tryingthespirits.com called Hell is Not Endless Punishment. This is one of those doctrines that if you've gone to church or been anywhere around traditional Christianity, this is pretty prevalent in almost all churches. And it's such a powerful doctrine because it so motivates you towards obedience. It's a huge fear factor in getting you to do what you're supposed to do, but it also really distorts the character of God and who He is. So we're going to be talking about this false doctrine and exposing how there certainly is hell, but it's definitely not what most people think it is. Most churches and pastors today teach that everyone is going to be judged after this life, and they will either enter eternal bliss with God or suffer eternal torment in hell. I believed these very same things since I was a very small child and began to teach others when I realized that there were eternal consequences to these beliefs. So most of my life I kind of just lived and I knew these things and accepted them, but didn't really do much about them. But then once it really hit me, the reality of what I was believed, then I was very motivated to do something about it. So I ended up spending a full year as a full-time missionary in Pisa, Italy, working for Campus Crusade for Christ. I took a year off after my sophomore year of college because the reality of eternal damnation, it really hit me like a ton of bricks. I had read a book by Lee Strobel called The Case for Easter, and I just realized that Christ really said something to these apostles that changed their lives, and they went and died for it. And I realized if I believed what he taught, then I had to dedicate my life to this message as well. And the only logical thing to do in light of my beliefs in eternal torment was to spend my life telling others about salvation through Christ to avoid hell and dwell in heaven forever. Now, most people think that Italy is Catholic, but in reality, the older generations are practicing Catholics. They're the only ones. Everyone else doesn't care. And most young Italians think that the Bible is a bunch of fairy tales. So I'm telling you this to give you some background into how I came to see the falsehood of this doctrine. As we began to talk with the students at the University of Pisa, it became abundantly clear that they could not understand what we were telling them about salvation through Christ. Our team leader read us these verses in 2 Corinthians and explained that the only way someone could believe the truth of the gospel and be saved was if God himself removed the veil from their eyes. Now, these were people in traditional Christianity, and they certainly didn't have the truth of the scriptures, and this guy Scott didn't, but he definitely understood in a way this verse, and it really helped me understand. So 2 Corinthians 3:14-16, but their minds were blinded, for until this day remains the same veil untaken away in the reading of the Old Testament, which veil is done away in Christ. But even unto this day, when Moses is read, the veil is upon their heart. Nevertheless, when it shall turn to the Lord, the veil shall be taken away. So I had never quite realized how powerful this blindness was. I talked with literally hundreds of students and other Italians that year, and only 2 expressed any interest in what I was trying to preach. I wasn't sure if either of them ever really fully grasped what I was telling them, but this verse became very clear to me, John 6:44, that says, "No man can come to me except the Father which has sent me draw him." It's the word for drag. It's the same word as when you drag fish into a boat. "And I will raise him up the last day." I remember sitting in my bed in Pisa realizing the only reason I was saved from this so-called hell that I believed in and that I so dreaded was that God had just randomly chosen me to be given eyes to see. And this really had a powerful impact on me for years to come. So a few years later, after returning from Italy, I had this thought: if Christ died for everyone, and if it's God that opens eyes and closes eyes, it has nothing to do with us, then why can't everyone be saved? So then this led to the thought, does hell really exist as I've been taught? And I got on the internet and I did a search for hell, and one of the first things I found was this paper written in the 1850s called The Origin of the Doctrine of Eternal Punishment. So as I was reading this profound paper, Mr. Thayer clearly demonstrates that the doctrine of hell and eternal torment was not a Jewish teaching and was most certainly not taught by Christ and his apostles. While everything that Mr. Thayer says is not true scripturally, he was actually an atheist. He helped me to legitimize my thoughts and got me to see that I had been taught pagan lies all of my life and not the true doctrine of Christ. So in the following pages, I'm going to show you from the scriptures how eternal torment was never mentioned anywhere in the Old Testament, but was a very well-developed theology among pagan cultures that significantly influenced the Jewish and early Christians. The true gospel of God, that all will be saved, has been hidden from the masses of Christianity. So I hope and pray that this study will be used to set you free and to help open your eyes to the truth of God's Word. So we're going to start by talking about Adam and Eve. This is the warning that God gives to Adam and Eve about what will happen if they disobey and break his commands and not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. If they break his command where he says don't eat of it, this is Genesis 2:17, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die. Now he simply says you will die and nothing more. So what I'm trying to establish is that with the first law given and the first punishment, there's no mention of this eternal torment in hell. And so here's the description of the punishments given to Adam and Eve and the serpent. In Genesis 3:14-19, he says, and the Lord said unto the serpent, because thou hast done this, you are cursed above all the cattle and above every beast of the field. And upon thy belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. Unto the woman I said, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and thy conception, which means through childbearing. In sorrow you will bring forth children, and your desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. It actually means your desire will be against your husband. Women are not naturally submissive. And unto Adam he said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and you've eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, saying you should not eat of it, cursed is the ground for your sake. In sorrow you shall eat it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles shall bring it forth to thee, and you shall eat the herbs of the field. In the sweat of your face and shall you eat your bread, till you return to the ground. For out of the ground you were taken. For dust thou art, unto the dust thou shalt return. Now this is really important. Notice that all of the punishments are very temporal in nature, meaning that they are not said to last forever. In verse 19, God even says, for dust you are, and to dust you shall return. So this would be a very odd way to explain being burned in hell forever, if that was indeed a true fact for Adam and Eve for having disobeyed these commandments. So as we go through these Old Testament passages, you're going to start to see why the Jews had a very simplistic view of the afterlife. There really is very little said in the Old Testament about the afterlife, and especially about any kind of eternal torment. So let's look at Cain. This is the first murderer in the Bible. And if there was going to be some type of eternal torment, you would expect it to be mentioned after this first most egregious act was committed. This is Genesis 4:10-13. And he said, what have you done? The voice of thy brother's blood cries unto me from the ground. And you are cursed from the earth, which has opened her mouth to receive your brother's blood from my hand. When you till the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength. A fugitive and a vagabond thou shalt be in all the earth. And Cain said unto the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. So Cain is quite dismayed over his punishment, which involves difficulty in cultivating the ground, along with being a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth. But there's absolutely no mention of eternal torment anywhere in this. So God has some mercy on Cain, and he says that he will avenge anyone that would kill him sevenfold, and he gives him a mark to keep him safe, because Cain had said, my punishment is greater than I can bear. This is in Genesis 4:14 and 15, he says, behold, you have driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from thy face shall I be hid. And I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth, and it shall come to pass that every one that finds me shall slay me. And the Lord said unto him, Therefore whoever slays Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. God has mercy upon the first murderer and reduces his concern of being killed by others. So why would he not have mercy on those who cry unto him for all of eternity out of this supposed torturous fires of hell? So are you starting to see the inconsistency here of how so early on in the book of Genesis God is shown to have some mercy, but we are taught this great inconsistency that he's going to torment some people in hell forever. And this theme continues on. Let's look at Noah and the flood. God is angry with sin upon the earth in Noah's time and causes a worldwide flood to destroy everyone but Noah and his family. Genesis 6:11. God was, it says, the earth was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt. For all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, The end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. God does not say he will torment these disobedient and sinful people in hell for all eternity. He simply says he will destroy them. In Genesis 7:23, and every living substance was destroyed, which was upon the face of the ground, both man and cattle, and the creeping things and the fowl of heaven, and they were destroyed from the face of the earth. And Noah only remained alive, and they were filled, and they that were with him in the ark. Now, I'm not espousing the doctrine that some churches teach, where after you die, if you don't go to, quote, heaven, that you're just annihilated, you're just destroyed. That's not a true doctrine. The truth is that your old man will be destroyed, and you will be saved as yet by fire. I'm just demonstrating here with Noah and the flood that it does not say anything about eternal torment. That's a very temporal punishment. So now let's look to Sodom and Gomorrah. What do we learn from Sodom and Gomorrah? Well, Genesis 18:20-21 says, And the Lord said, Because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry of it, which has come unto me, and if not, I will know. And verses 24-25, Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities. Again, there's no mention of eternal torment after their destruction. Sodom and Gomorrah are actually mentioned in the New Testament in the book of Jude. Jude 1:7 says, Even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, are set forth as an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. This verse is often used to support the doctrine of eternal hell. But the question is Sodom and Gomorrah still burning today? Obviously, no, it's not. So this example demonstrates that the punishment is not eternal. Here's the truth of the matter. Proverbs 26:20. Where no wood is, the fire goes out, and where there is no talebearer, the strife ceases. Once the wicked city and its inhabitants were destroyed, the fire went out. So we're going to cover in much greater detail later in the study this word, but the word translated as eternal in most English translations is the Greek word aionios, and does not mean eternal. It means lasting for an unspecified period of time. It is better translated in Young's literal as age during fire. The fire of God's judgment burns until all the evil is gone, and then the judgment stops and we are saved. Well, the salvation is completed. You're being saved as the fire is burning, and then the salvation is completed when the fire stops. This is 1 Corinthians 3:15. If any man's work shall be burned, he shall suffer loss, but he himself shall be saved, yet so as by fire. What's being burned is our evil works, not a literal person burning in fiery hell forever. So now let's look at the curses in Deuteronomy. When God gave Israel the law, he described in detail the consequences for disobedience, but there's no mention of eternal torment. I'm taking the time to show you these verses because I want it to be abundantly clear that eternal torment is a pagan doctrine and is not mentioned anywhere in the Old Testament, nor in the New as well, but we're focusing on the Old right now. Deuteronomy 28:14 says, "And thou shalt not go aside from any of the words which I command you this day, nor to the right nor to the left, or to go after other gods and serve them." And Deuteronomy 8:15 says, but it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee. So what are these curses? This is Deuteronomy 28:16-20. "Cursed shall be thou in the city, and cursed shall be thou in the field. Cursed shall be thy basket and thy store. Cursed shall be thy fruit of thy body, and the fruit of thy land, the increase of your kin, and the flocks and the sheep. Cursed shall be you when you come in, and cursed shall you be when you go out. The Lord shall send upon thee cursing, vexation, and rebuke, and all that sets thine hand to for you to do, until you be destroyed, and until you perish quickly, because of the wickedness of your doings, whereby you have forsaken me." So again, all temporal punishments. Nothing about afterlife or eternal torture or never-ending suffering or anything like that. So what about suicide? A lot of people say suicide's the ultimate sin. If you commit this sin, then you're definitely going to hell. Let's look at 2 Samuel 17:23. "And when I can't say this name, Ahithophel saw that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his donkey and arose and got him home to his house, to his city, and he said and put his household in order. And he hanged himself, and he died, and was buried in the sepulchre of his father." Again, there is no mention of any type of eternal torment or fate for this person. It just states this simple fact. So it seems like a pretty grievous omission if the punishment for suicide is eternal torment in hell. Why is it not mentioned? Why are we not told that and given a warning so that we don't follow in that same error? So I'm going to talk about a different topic now, which is just recompense. Let's consider for a moment that the justice of God. In Hebrews, we're told that every transgression and disobedience received a just recompense of reward. Hebrews 2:2. It says, "For if the word spoken by angels was steadfast, and every transgression and disobedience received a just recompense of reward." It just means that God gives an appropriate punishment for what is done. In the courts of this world, the punishment is equivalent to the crime committed. The worst thing you could possibly do in this life is kill another person. And the punishment for this in many places is death. So what could a man possibly do that deserves eternal torment? Is God not capable of teaching us to be obedient and delivering us from our evil thoughts and actions? Is he less just than carnal men that rule this world? You know, the purpose of discipline or punishment is to change behavior. And if you can get somebody to change and become different, then you've accomplished your purpose. Well, is God so weak that he can't change us to be obedient so he doesn't have to torture us forever? These are some of the thoughts that, I started having as I was coming out of this doctrine. These are just some things, if you've never heard this before, to consider. So now we're going to move on to the Hebrew word for hell. The word translated as hell in the Old Testament is the Hebrew word Sheol. It's H7585 in Strong's. And if you look in the King James, it's translated 31 times as grave, 31 times as hell, and 3 times as pit. The words most often used are the place of the dead, which is simply the grave, Genesis 37:35. "And all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted, for he said, I will go down to the grave unto my son mourning. Thus his father wept for him." And Job 7:9 says, as the cloud is consumed and vanished away, so he that goes down to the grave shall come up no more. So you can see that clearly if the desire is to go to the grave unto mourning, it certainly, eternal torment and hellfire is not a better place than losing your son. So certainly, these people in the Old Testament did not have this concept that the grave was eternal torment. The word is also used to express distress or deliverance from great danger. This is Job 17:11-14. My days are past, my purposes are broken off, even the thoughts of my heart. They change the night to day, the light is short because of darkness. I will wait, the grave is my house. I have made my bed in the darkness. I have said to corruption, thou art my father, to the worm, thou art my mother and my sister. In Proverbs 32:3, O Lord my God, I cried unto thee, and thou hast healed me. O Lord, thou hast brought my soul up from the grave. Thou hast kept me alive, that I should not go down to the pit. So David did not die, literally, and go into the grave. He's using this as an expression to describe the great danger he had been delivered from by the Lord. He even says in verse 3 that he has been kept alive so he would not go down to the pit. Job even asked God to hide him in the grave from all the wrath and trials which are upon him. So is this a place of eternal torment? Then why would Job be asking God to hide him there? And you've got to realize that this same word Sheol that we're reading about his grave is the same word the translators call hell. So if there is in fact a hell, and this is the same word, they are being incredibly inconsistent in the way that they're translating this. Job 14:13. We already read that. So now let's look at some verses where King James translates Sheol as hell. This is Deuteronomy 32:22. For a fire is kindled in mine anger, and shall burn unto the lowest hell, and shall consume the earth with her incense, and set on fire the foundations of the mountains. I will heap mischiefs upon them, I will send mine arrows upon them. They shall be burnt with hunger, and devoured with burning heat, and with bitter destruction I will send the teeth of beasts upon them, with the poison of serpents of the dust. The sword without, the terror within, shall destroy both the young man and the virgin, the suckling also with the man of gray hairs. I said I would scatter them into the corners, I would make them remembrance of them to cease from among men. So you got to notice here that, so let me start over. So a mind tainted with the pagan doctrine of eternal torment, when you have that mind, these verses in Deuteronomy seem to be referring to there being burning and fire and hell forever, which actually it's just the word grave. But look at verse 24. They shall be burnt with hunger. God is using fire in the grave, or supposedly hell, just like David does in Psalms. It's a way of describing great and terrible trials. The chapter continues on describing the very physical and temporal consequences for disobedience. All of the following verses would make much more sense to be translated as grave, because saying the English word hell brings to mind all of the pagan doctrines that we associate with hell, which are not a part of traditional Jewish doctrine. I'm referring to the teachings of the Old Testament. So here are these four verses. 2 Samuel 22:6. The sorrows of hell compassed about me. The snares of death prevented me. In Job 11:8. It is as high as heaven. What can you do? Deeper than hell. What can you know? Psalms 9:17. The wicked shall be turned into hell, and all the nations that forget God. In Psalm 16:10. For thou wilt not leave my soul in hell, nor will thou suffer thy Holy One to see corruption. So these are all just examples of how this misunderstanding of the word hell, when you read it in the English translation, really distorts your view of what the Old Testament scriptures are saying. It's just the grave. So this is the last section we're going to do here, and then we're going to stop for the night. Moses was aware of endless punishment. He was taught in all the ways of the Egyptians, yet he never mentions any of their pagan doctrines relating to eternal torment. And the Egyptians, as I'm going to show you here, were the ones it was one of the primary originating cultures of eternal torment. Acts 17:21 and 22 says, "And when he was cast out, Pharaoh's daughter took him up and nourished him for her own son. And Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and deeds." So here's a quote that describes the Egyptian teachings on the afterlife. It says, "These souls whose scales of good had outweighed the scales of bad would be granted permission to enter the blissful afterlife. On the other hand, those souls whose scales of bad deeds were heavy would be handed over to the devourer of the dead," which was the Egyptian equivalent of hell. And they would be tortured forever in this afterlife. So doesn't that sound a lot like the traditional Christian doctrine of you die and you're judged and you go to either eternal bliss or eternal torment? It comes from the Egyptians. So Moses was well aware of this doctrine of eternal torment and never made any mention of it in all of his writings to Israel. Moses did, however, consistently warn the people not to go after the false gods of other nations, of which he was well aware. So this is compelling evidence that eternal torment was certainly not a Jewish teaching. So that's going to be the end of the notes for tonight. I appreciate you all listening.